Thank you, Kathy, and good afternoon, everyone. So I'd like to also extend a welcome to everyone and just say my personal thanks to everyone on the team. Working together the last little while has been amazing, and I'll be supporting Darren and everyone in trying to create a support network where we can support people who have been injured or bereaved. And in this little talk I want to give very briefly, I want to think about the importance of hearing and listening to the whistleblower and why this is such an important theme for us to consider when it comes to those who have been affected by this issue, the injured and bereaved. Before I do that, I just briefly want to give an introduction to what I've been involved with the last couple of years, which really was from about 2 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago. Even at the inception, when I first saw the idea of rolling out a new type of vaccine to the population, I was very concerned at seeing how critical voices who were sounding the alarm bell at that stage, even in late 2020, early 2021, experts in areas like immunology, from the vaccine industry itself, molecular biology, understanding how the body reacts to different environmental settings, and also toxicologists, so people who understand the effect that injection of certain ingredients could have potentially. I actually had the opportunity to get to know some of these folks, even people who were CEOs of small pharmaceutical research companies who have publicly been sounding the alarm, both in England and in America as well, and seeing how their voice was suppressed and silenced caused me great alarm. And that was really, for me, the first red flag when it came to this vaccine rollout, that caused me to take a very deep dive. And to that end, I spent quite considerable time and effort putting together a website and writing reports, articles, issuing freedom of information requests, creating videos, doing presentations. And my experience, perhaps like some people here today, is also being silenced as well and being banned from social media, taken off LinkedIn permanently, can't get that account back ever. It's a permanent suspension, suspended from Twitter for 8 months, all my full-length presentations removed from YouTube, and then obviously constant bans and deprioritization on Facebook. I'm only mentioning that to explain that my motivation isn't to give sort of theories that come off the top of my head. It's actually just to speak for the silenced voices of the experts, of the whistleblowers that I'll mention in a moment, and of course the voice of the vaccine injured and bereaved. And yet doing that can lead to the content being removed from social media. So this is a very important thing to consider. And then professionally, my background is cybersecurity. So with that comes a critical mindset and an understanding that when a product is marketed through the media, through the government, through the official channels, those stakeholders, for whatever reason, are not totally independent and impartial stakeholders. We've heard about the MHRA already, the medical regulator. Well, they should be totally impartial and shouldn't have any biases. But we know that 86% of their funding comes directly from the pharmaceutical industry. So is that really an independent voice in this matter? Is it an adjudicator for medical safety as it should be? Can that explain some of the problems that we're seeing? And of course, the pharmaceutical companies themselves are private enterprises. They have stakeholders, they have shareholders that they have to make a return for. They are ultimately making profit. Now, it doesn't mean that every product they ever make doesn't have a medical benefit in some occasions. But what is required from the medical regulator, from the government, and at this stage it falls down to citizen researchers and concerned citizens, is to sound the alarm if we have regulatory capture and we have regulators that are not properly doing their job. And principally we're thinking about the real world safety data. And everyone in this room who has a story of a vaccine injury or bereavement represents a real world data point that should be taken incredibly seriously for a medical product that's only been rolled out in the last few years using novel technology. It should be viewed with the utmost suspicion. The MHRA should be making it so easy for you to tell your story. Society should be making it so easy for you to tell your story. If that's not happening, something's gone badly wrong. And I'm about to give an example from only less than 20 years ago of this very same paradigm, and I'll give you real statistics that everyone accepts, even in the mainstream media, about how serious this problem can be. So I want to say that the foundation of medical ethics is first, do no harm. This is a very important principle for us to keep in mind as we think about the COVID vaccines, and the importance of not only hearing but listening to the whistleblower. And I ask you the question, is the whistleblower always believed the first time? Think about any scandal in history in the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years of any type where you have a whistleblower. Are they believed the first time? Are they understood, revered by society, celebrated and extolled straight away? Maybe 50 years later a film comes out and does celebrate them, but at the time, does it or does it not? Are they disbelieved, ignored, shunned or slandered? Is this the experience of the vaccine injured and bereaved today? Now I want to think briefly about the COVID-19 clinical trials. I want to focus on Pfizer's trial for the Pfizer-BioNTech drug or vaccine. So there was a girl in the adolescent trial named Maddie de Garay, who was a healthy child, very active, had lots of energy. After her second dose in January 2021, she immediately felt pain at the injection site, and she describes it as feeling like her heart was going to come out from her chest. She suffered very severe and devastating physical injuries. She's now wheelchair bound. She uses a nasogastric tube. So devastating mobility issues, devastating gastrointestinal injuries, 12 years old at the time. However, in the report which Pfizer write up basically in the New England Journal of Medicine, which summarizes the clinical trial, the actual very raw patient level data is not actually released to our medical regulators. It's written up in these summary documents, some of which are released to the public. So a few months later, the 15th of July 2021, Pfizer's clinical trial report claimed there were no vaccine-related serious adverse events. So none of them, they say, were vaccine-related. They can discount all of them. But the same summer, Maddie de Garay is on video at Senator Ron Johnson's conference in a wheelchair with a nasogastric tube. So how are we seeing reports that don't align to reality? One of the medical reports when she went to the hospital said suspected adverse reaction, and the family still have that. There was another boy in the same trial who was actually originally in the placebo group, and then he crossed over and took the treatment drug, the vaccine. He was 15 years old, then he turned 16, and they were able to give him the drug under the EUA for the adult dose, or the adult EUA. And he suffered myopericarditis. That's myocarditis, inflammation of the myocardium around the heart, and pericarditis, inflammation of the fluid-filled sac around the heart. He got both of them. It records in a document of the FDA dated 26th of October that a cardiologist advised him to undertake limited activity after 2 months. The trial investigator and the FDA both agreed it was related with reasonable possibility, a suspected adverse reaction. There were about something over 2,000 people in the adolescent trial. We only know for sure of 1,080 of those adolescents that definitely took the drug from both the treatment group and the placebo group who crossed over. So between 1,080 up to a maximum of 2,000. 2 of those children, 1 girl, 1 boy, suffered devastating injuries. Does every parent hear about that when the offer was made in the schools for adolescents to take the COVID vaccine? The very same dose, same strength. There's another whistleblower, a very determined man who sent me all of his documents all the way from Argentina through email, Augusto Ru. He's a lawyer from Argentina. He was also in the Pfizer trial. He had to sue, he had to fight very hard to get all of his medical notes from the time of the clinical trial. He received a second dose of the Pfizer vaccine 9th of September 2020. 3 days later, he admitted to hospital with chest pains. He has a CT scan taken showing laminar pericardial effusion, so too much fluid in the pericardium, pericarditis. He also has a note, his exit note from the hospital under Dr. Destilio, a senior doctor, saying, it's in Spanish, but the translation says, adverse reaction to coronavirus vaccine, high probability. That's a suspected adverse reaction. But his clinical trial records, which were released fairly recently under Freedom of Information request, ignore the real cause of his hospitalization, and it cites suspected COVID-19 illness and anxiety, because he'd previously had psychological problems. So, once again, his data is missing in all of the official records of the clinical trial. So we now have a problem with data integrity. We can see that what has been written up about these clinical trials doesn't accord to reality. My question is this. If the COVID-19 vaccine rollout is an exercise in genuine public health risk management, why is so little attention given to adverse reactions some people have suffered? And given the fact I've just mentioned, that adverse events were suppressed during the clinical trials, surely it's completely inevitable, sadly, that we would see so many injuries as we have seen when it's rolled out to the whole population. There's also a whistleblower named Brooke Jackson, who is called the FDA whistleblower hotline in September 2020. She has a legal case against Pfizer, and she's recorded so many instances of clinical trial protocols not being followed and of other anomalies that do not make sense in her experience. She was a senior lead with Ventavia, one of the research groups that works with Pfizer. So we have a whistleblower willing to testify already. But there's a precedent. I want to briefly cover this. There was a drug a few years ago called Vioxx. It was a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug to treat inflammation and pain. In January 1999, Merck launched a study. It was their drug. And they launched a safety study called the Vioxx Gastrointestinal Outcomes Research Study, VIGOR. FDA approved Vioxx in May 1999. But it was known to Merck in late 1999 from their own internal data. They had their own DSMB, that's the Data and Safety Monitoring Board. They identified the risk of serious heart problems being double that of a competitor drug called naproxen. However, this data wasn't fairly disclosed when they wrote it up in the very same journal that Pfizer wrote up their trial report in, New England Journal of Medicine. It later transpired that they had withheld key data, and the New England Journal of Medicine editor-in-chief later said that the authors of the Merck safety study, the VIGOR study, withheld critical data on the cardiovascular toxicity of Merck's drug Vioxx. 1 year before the drug was pulled, Vioxx had sales and revenues of $2.5 billion. So it was a very profitable drug. Merck voluntarily withdrew it from the market in 2004. You might ask the question, well, how did the drug get pulled? Well, there was basically a very determined person, an epidemiologist called Dr. David Graham, who conducted a study on Vioxx. And he proved, and this is all accepted in all mainstream publications, you can read articles on this from Forbes and all kinds of mainstream publications. It's even on Wikipedia. 88,000 to 139,000 heart attacks with a 30 to 40% fatality rate, resulting in probable 30,000 to 55,000 deaths. It's mainstream, that's within the last 20 years. Published in The Lancet. And the FDA tried to suppress his findings. But I thought they were supposed to be an independent medical regulator like the MHRA. Same problem. They received funding from the pharmaceutical industry. Dr. David Graham described it as the worst public health disaster in history. Dr. David Graham learned that his study would be swept under the carpet, so he needed help. What did he do? He contacted a group called the Government Accountability Project, which supports whistleblowers. It's actually used by high-profile clients, even from the national security community. The reason I mention that is that's actually the stakes of what we're dealing with here. When you have a problem of this scale, it's basically an issue, I see it as, with whistleblowers. And whistleblowers and people who are telling the truth when all kinds of stakeholders don't want them to, deserve and require our support. And that's what I would like to do as part of this group. I'd like to offer support because I've seen silenced voices. Academics and researchers have been silenced from the very beginning. Adverse reactions from the COVID-19 vaccine trials, those adverse reactions have been suppressed or written out of trial records. And finally today, the voice of the vaccine injured and bereaved is also suppressed. So now I want to work with everyone at VIBS and I, and to work with everyone here to help everyone here who's been affected by this issue to find your voice. Because we should create a supportive environment, and I'd like to work with everyone to campaign with you and alongside you, because I believe that your voice and the voice of the vaccine injured and bereaved is powerful and it can affect change, and we should all support it. And finally, as is our slogan, and we have it on some of our literature, you are not alone, because we're here to create a support network.